This is Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio, a show that explores the world of health and wellness innovation, enabling sustainability, equity, and access to high-quality, patient-centric care. I'm Gregg Masters, executive producer and co-host, and am joined by my esteemed colleague, digital health advocate, author, and global thought leader, Gil Bashe. Together, we bring you thought-provoking people, groundbreaking ideas, and the transformative companies making a difference. On today's episode, we're in the company of David B. Klein, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Click Therapeutics, a company that specializes in developing and commercializing software as prescription medical treatments for patients with unmet medical needs. And with that very brief handoff, Gil, the mic is yours.
Gregg, thank you once again for that incredible introduction. My friend, I'm always thinking of you, always appreciating the work that you're doing here on Health Unabashed, and also your show with Fred Goldstein, Pop Health Week. I want to tell all our listeners to tune in to Gregg and Fred and follow some of the key things that they are talking about every day on Healthcare Now Radio. A very special guest on with us today, David Klein, who's the CEO of Click Therapeutics. I have heard David before. Actually, David was a keynote fireside chat at Hit Labs about a year ago. I heard David and I said, he's got to be a guest on Health Unabashed, and here he is. David, welcome to the program. You've had a very interesting background, and I'm sure that that's somewhat informed your thinking process. Just for our listeners, I just want to say that Click Therapeutics is a visionary company. It's really redefining the validity, the power, the value of digital therapeutics. David really has been, I think, making some important calls about the category. And many of you have been following it. You're wondering what is going on. I think David Klein and Click are the people and the enterprise to follow. We're going to explore why exactly. David, you were one of the very early people to talk about digital therapeutics, not as so much as a digital tool or a tech tool. You really started to define this as, I would just say you used the term, a bold term. You said it's sort of like biopharma. It's like biotech. We need to have the same rigor. Digital therapeutics need to have the exact same rigor as biopharmaceutical companies. And I just wanted to kick off. I want to ask you sort of a pointed question because I think you've been I think you've had some clarity on this. Is this because digital therapeutics ultimately are either competing with or complementing pills and tablets and capsules? Was that the core concept that you were thinking of? Were you also thinking about the fact that science was really going to drive this category, not the gee whiz, but actual clinical data was essential to making providers and payers feel confident and advocates of the category? When you use those terms, what were you thinking of?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gil. I mean, first, let me just thank you all for having me on the show today, and it's a pleasure as always to speak with you, Gil. I'd say, look, this goes back a long way. In 2012, I actually coined the term digital therapeutics, so it wasn't used publicly, at least until then. Tried to trademark it and a whole bunch of things, but that never worked out. And I'm, in many respects, glad for that. But what we meant by the term was really just software as medical treatments, right? I was currently in the biotech industry, was seeing a pretty significant rise in mobile phone usage, and that, people would use these smartphones, and it was very clear that their behavior was changing. And we surmised even that their brains were being rewired, and figured, look, if we could target, we could develop software targeting certain diseases and to modify the behavior and cognition in a way that could be potentially beneficial towards those diseases, we could create something that was as good, if not better, than than some drugs, and even be combined with drugs for safer and more efficacious treatments. So digital therapeutics were born, actually created the term digital therapeutics before the company Click Therapeutics, just by a couple of weeks, I'd say, and then founded Click Therapeutics, really based on that premise that software can be medical treatments, and that we'd form a kind of, call it biotech-like model around proving out that thesis. So developing software programs to treat specific diseases and proving it in randomized controlled trials. I will say, that term, not something we own or I stake claim to by any means. And people use it in different ways, right? I think it's evolved a bit to what Click is doing is really in call it prescription digital therapeutics. And, which is not a term that we invented, so PDTs. And that's something where we're really looking to get these programs as medicines into the medical system. And that means physicians prescribing, payers reimbursing, patients using and respecting like medicines. And I think that if that's your business model, if you're really trying to get these taken seriously and adopted as medicine and really looking to develop a new way that many diseases are treated, then you've got to build an evidence base that's as good, if not potentially better than drugs. And I think that we've seen that over the last few years. The market has spoken. They've, really said that, look, we're not going to accept there's a lower bar of evidence for digital therapeutics. And we're now seeing, Click included, a group of companies that are really approaching the space in a way to generate evidence and clinical data in a very similar way than you would see drugs develop.
I was wondering, your background is so different than other people who enter the space. A lot of people enter the space come from a technology or an engineering background, and I meet them all around the world. And you sort of cut your teeth at Pfizer in a major way. You did a bit of private equity work specific to the biotech industry. I think you even have an exit or so in that area as an investor. You really entered this from the point of view of the health sector as opposed to the engineering or technology sector. And I'm just curious, do you think that you're an ally, I find, to the biopharmaceutical industry? Many of the people I meet in digital therapeutics are feisty and combative. They see the tablet or the capsule as the competitor. I get the sense that you see them as the complementer and the ally at times.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no doubt big pharma, small pharma, biotech, medicine companies have really changed the world. I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago till the average age of people was, 35 or 40, and that's been, steadily going up. And it's in no small part due to these new innovative compounds that have really cured disease, treated disease. I mean, everything you can imagine. And those aren't going anywhere. I mean, look, if anything, they're becoming more and more sophisticated. And I think we'll begin to cure more and more diseases, and people will live longer and longer because of drugs. To that end, there is still this, tremendous unmet need in the space where, so many people with chronic conditions just, sure, they might be getting treatment, but are they getting, better, or are they getting significantly better, or are they being cured? And the answer is really no. And that's globally. And you can look at, all of these different diseases from cardiometabolic to mental health disorders that are all really being helped currently by drugs for the people with access to those drugs, but they're not being helped as much as they could be. So that's one place where, digital can really have a profound effect and fill these gaps, and not just in access and really having a modality with the ability to really get to anyone in the world and get medicine to people in need, but also to result in a safer and more efficacious treatment by potentially addressing some of the things that are behavioral, that really only digital or sometimes face-to-face therapy, these kind of things can do, right? We're talking about safer and more effective treatments for everyone in the world, and that's a big deal. And I think we're on an important mission to make sure that these programs become a part of standard of care.
Outside your role as CEO of Click Therapeutics, you did a very good job, I thought, at analyzing what went wrong with PAIR. And obviously at the heels of PAIR, we saw Babylon Health stumble. We saw Olive AI stumble. You've been a little bit of a prophet there. You almost have predicted some of this happening. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind putting on your analyst hat for a second, not analyzing each of those companies, but I was just wondering, do you think there's a question of sometimes sort of like someone jumps in early, they think that they have it all figured out, they go down a path and then they hit a wall. And I'm just holding up, our audience won't see it, I'm holding up my Apple Newton right now. I don't even know if you know what an Apple Newton was, but the Apple Newton was a great idea. The market wanted a Palm Pilot, right? That's the reality. So I'm wondering if you had the advantage, a very sort of like front runner advantage of not being first in, of looking at the territory, of using that as almost market research and getting your finger on the pulse of what does the physician want? What does the payer want? How do you reflect on that and where you're going?
Just tuning in, you're listening to Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Our guest is David B. Klein, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Click Therapeutics, a company that specializes in developing and commercializing software as prescription medical treatments for patients with unmet medical needs. Stay tuned for the rest of the story.
To be clear, so we certainly weren't the first to conceive of digital or software as a treatment, right? By any stretch of the imagination. I mean, even Achilles was around as a company before us. There were people using websites to try to treat people, at least 10 years before Click was ever around. But we were before PAIR. Actually, I remember the old CEO of PAIR Therapeutics, Corey McCann, was actually the first investor I ever pitched Click to. At the time, he was at MPM Capital, and explained what a digital therapeutic was and my vision for the space. And he ended up starting his own digital therapeutics company, which of course we were rooting for in a big way. I mean, it's really a rising tide lifts all ships situation. And so we're really rooting for everyone in some respect. I think that the PAIR, call it debacle, was a bit predictable for folks who were really paying attention. And the reasons why are really, PAIR put all of their, and this is my understanding, and some of these quotes are just directly from ICER, but PAIR put all of their efforts into commercializing, or their commercial efforts into commercializing a program called Reset-O for, ostensibly opioid use disorder. And there really just was no evidence of efficacy or clinical meaningful benefit. PAIR's program of Reset-O, no RCT was ever done on Reset-O, and that's according to ICER, right? And that's verbatim what they said. And the 2014 pivotal trial that was used for FDA clearance was, very poorly controlled. It was not double-blinded, had no sham in the control group, was done on a web-based software on computers inside of a clinic. The groups weren't comparable at baseline. The study was rife with other issues, and it still failed to show efficacy. So even in that study, they did not drive abstinence beyond the control in that study. And then they were still able to take that data, go to FDA. And this is where, a lot of people get confused. FDA never authorized Reset-O with a treatment claim, right? FDA instead authorized a claim.
Now I'm really not so sure when we're dealing with new innovative categories. And I see this a lot where first in has a lot of pimples on it. And then, people look at the marketplace and the marketplace desires. Opioid use disorder is OUD is a pretty serious condition. I'm surprised. We don't have to go into it. I'm just surprised that they would overstep what the package insert said. But I'm picking up something, David, that you're saying that anybody who listens to CNN, if you listen to CNN, you'll hear often, and I hear often in the course of a day, Click Therapeutics commercials about your clinical trial enrollment. I mean, you're treating your approach like a pharmaceutical company, effectively. How you reach out to people. You're passionate about getting people in a clinical trial, and again, something like opioid use disorder is pretty serious, life-threatening condition. So you've got to get it right. It's not just like sort of like compliance or adherence. It really is getting that right. You I notice a lot of the people you surround yourself with also have, like yourself, have pharma industry background. And do you think that has really helped you keep Click on the straight and narrow in terms of, hey, we're going to dedicate ourselves to clinical evidence that is meaningful for physicians, for payers, and obviously for patients? You're pretty passionate about that. I've heard you write about that, or I've heard you speak that. I've seen you write about that. Do you think that you have the unique advantage of like looking at the predecessors and just saying, hey, we're not going down that road. We're going down the road that the market requires us, or the Food and Drug Administration requires us to focus on?
I would say, there's always benefit, right, into being second or third. I mean, look at, we consider what we're doing, and to be clear, I didn't say that payer deviated from the label and statements or something like that. I'm not sure, or certainly didn't pay as close of attention to notice anything like that. But they obviously made a huge amount of noise around something that was clearly going to be an extreme uphill battle. I will say that we kind of look at this space and we look at Pear and, some of those other folks really almost as like the, call it MySpaces of this space, right? And you can kind of go down the list of different industries that developed in that exact same way. And then you start to see, Meta and Twitter and TikTok and, companies that are very possibly learning from some of those old companies and just doing things better. Even if they're small, they're meaningful. I think, we're doing a lot different. 70 of our full-timers report right up into the CTO vertical, software engineers, product managers.
Yeah, you need both. I'm wondering, the FDA has issued some draft guidance on prescription drug use related to software. And that touches on what you said earlier, which is that digital therapeutics and pharmaceutical products can complement one another. So what's your thoughts about the FDA sort of suggested guidance on therapeutic software?
Sure. So, thank you for asking that, Gil. I mean, this is a whole...
It's an important question. You got to ask it.
It's a very important question. And so to kind of give the audience some overview of that, I mean, there's new FDA draft guidance called the Prescription Drug Use Related Software Draft Guidance. And as an acronym, PDURS, or as Click is trying to make it happen, Peters. So if you all could, try to use that word to make it happen, we'll see. But the Peters guidance is, critical to the industry, and actually to my vision in first founding this company, where I always thought software and apps would be combined with pharmacotherapies and that result would be a safer and more efficacious treatment. What Peters does is set out a pathway that if a software as a medical device demonstrates in one or more well-controlled and adequate studies that benefit can be incorporated directly into the drug label, actually right into the package insert, right? So tremendous deal. I mean, if you can imagine, a drug that might get prescribed, 50-50, I'm just making those numbers up, but, we'll talk about, Dupixent or Rinvoq for atopic dermatitis, right? And, well, what if Rinvoq, let's say, added software to that drug and now, added scratch behavior to their label, where the biologics can target the itch pretty effectively, but scratching is something that's very behavioral oriented, and that's a very viable avenue, for example. And I could go through therapeutic area after therapeutic area on how these drugs could be improved under this guidance and now result in a more efficacious and in some cases actually even safer intervention. And I think what you'll start to see are more and more drug companies utilizing this guidance to improve their drugs, and really in, not just an offensive way, but even defense. This is a big deal for market share. If you had prescribers that might be 50-50 on, two different drugs in the same class before, and one of them all of a sudden was, more efficacious than the other, even if it's modest, that could tip to 70-30 or even 80-20, right? So you're talking about something that could really, and I believe will, profoundly affect the industry, and that it's now, all but written in stone that software will be incorporated into drugs as single treatments, and that the drugs of the future are, likely to be the pharma companies and so on that also has the best software, right? So not just the best. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're the perfect ally for that. It's hard to believe that 30 minutes goes by in a blink, and it does. So I have to ask you one last really super quick question as we're heading toward our close. And that is, you also are looking at the use of AI and its role will play. And in sort of our last minute left, can you give us a top line on your philosophy about Gen AI, and ChatGPT in your development?
Sure. So, Click has been utilizing AI and machine learning since far before it was cool, right? In fact, all of our products and all of our registrational trials do incorporate AI. And we've been getting better and better at deploying it. And really, I think that we look at it two ways, right? One is the responsible use of AI. And then two is really the patient centricity in product design. How is this better for the patient? So many of the ways that we're utilizing AI is to improve personalization of our programs to drive even better engagement, which ultimately we believe will drive even better outcomes. Now, it's important to note that much of what we use, or even all of it, especially in our products, are more, call it white box AI, right? They're not at this point, given the regulatory constraints, generative AI, right? That's a different animal, and it with white box AI, for lack of a better term, you can. It might be trillions of lines that you need to look at, but you can always determine the rationale for why something did something, right? It is fully algorithm based. For generative AI, there's more of a mystery often in those outcomes, and I'm greatly simplifying that, but we are now starting to experiment in a very safe and contained way, where how we can use generative AI, in kind of different aspects of the company, and view ourselves and always have been as pioneers with AI in treating patients, and
you are. Well, I think you've been pioneers all along. David, I am so appreciative that I know you and your family are heading out on vacation. I want to thank you for making time for us on this program. I hope you'll come back again. You'll let me invite you back again to talk more about this, not just because of your great leadership at Click Therapeutics, but your full understanding of what we're doing in this industry. We've been listening to David Klein, CEO, founder, and CEO of Click Therapeutics. David, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me, Gil.
And that, dear listeners, is the last word for today's melody. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in, and our special guest, David B. Klein, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Click Therapeutics, a company that specializes in developing and commercializing software as prescription medical treatments for patients with unmet medical needs. Stay connected with David's work at Click via www.clicktherapeutics.com and follow Click's innovations on Twitter via @Click_TX. You can also check out David and Click on LinkedIn as well. For more information on Health UnaBASHed, head over to our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Catch our show weekdays at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern, or 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Keep the conversation going with Gil and me on Twitter by connecting with us via Gil_Bashe, and that's Bashe, and Gregg Masters MPH, and be sure to tag your tweets with #HealthUnaBASH, and that is Gregg with 2 G's. Until next time, embrace your passion for better health unapologetically.